Chapter Spooks.
G'day, and welcome to Chapter Spooks, where we talk about the books that keep your kids up at night. I'm your podcast host, Matthew A.J. Anderson. I'm a horror author, narratologist, word nerd, and skeleton locksmith. And today, we're talking about the next book in the Frightville series, The Haunted Key. Now, as I teased at the end of the last episode, this is a story that is a ghost story. It's all about ghosts and sort of a haunted house. And I also said that even though I tend to really hate ghost stories, in fact, it's something of a pet peeve of mine, I actually really like the way the story is done. I've been doing some self-reflecting in order to try to figure out why, and I think I've managed to put into words why it is that this one doesn't bother me as much. And it's relatively simple, all told. I mean, some of it is to do with the mechanics, but some of it is just to do with the fact that this is a very good story. Oh, and the second thing, I feel like I need to mention this now because I was doing a bit more research online, and I found out that whilst I initially said that Mike Ford, as an author, doesn't seem to have too much on his plate except for what I already knew about him, that's actually not true. What I realized is that one of the websites I was looking for him on, Goodreads, seems to not recognize that Mike Ford is the same person as Michael Thomas Ford, his full name and full author name, which he sometimes uses on his books, because Michael T. Ford isn't just an occasional writer of horror literature. Mike Ford is also a celebrated award-winning queer author who writes queer literature. So the man has won 5 Lambda Literary Awards. He's well known for books like Suicide Notes, Jane Bites Back, Lily, and, oh, I love this title, Love and Other Curses. So when I found the author, I decided to reach out to ask him why he wrote this series of 4 books, even though he does a couple of standalones. But the reason I'm bringing this all up for you is not only so you know more about the actual author than what I said at the start, but it's also because I reached out and in my contact information I said, oh, and I was wondering, why did you not include much queer theming and stuff in these books? Was it a conscious decision or what? And I feel really stupid for asking that because I wrote that, I sent that, I read this book, and I immediately found some very prominent and very sweet gay characters and queer themes in this story. So, if he's reading that email and eventually listening to this episode, yeah, that was a stupid question, considering that I now see that there was some queer themes in here. But, so, we've got that to look forward to around the midpoint of this book. So, without further ado, to see why I enjoy this book so much, let's just get into Frightville number 3. The Haunted Key. So our story opens and we're introduced to our main character and our inciting incident straight away because Sophia is up in the attic with her father and they're trying to open a trunk. But even though there's a ring of keys on the key ring they got when they bought this house, not a single one of the keys can open the trunk. And Sophia finds it really frustrating, not only because she was curious what was inside, but she also says that this is almost a representation of all the things around that she doesn't like about moving here. Not only does she not like having to move to a town in the middle of nowhere, she moved away from her friends. They've got this big house that they're renovating because their dad wants to turn it into like a bed and breakfast. So they've got like 7 rooms downstairs and then this upstairs attic to sort out, which has mysteries like the weird beds up there they don't understand, and of course, this trunk that nobody can open. Also, I got to say that her name is Sophia Flores, and her father is obviously some sort of South American or Latinx descent, and so I like that they actually throw that in a little bit. The first time a book has actually acknowledged a non-white protagonist's ethnicity, because he constantly calls his daughter Mija. Now, I don't know enough about Spanish to know whether or not that's actually a word. To me, it sounds like a shortening of mi hija, which would mean my daughter, but either way, it's the first time one of these books has openly acknowledged that people have their own culture, so I did appreciate that. But yeah, Sophia is basically doing the woe is me, I hate having moved to a new town thing, and so her dad says, look, we'll be making this place better over time, so how about we'll go to the hardware store, I'll get a fan for your room so you can sleep comfortably tonight, and hey, I'm sure there's a bookstore in town. Now, quick side note, I know a lot of books do this. I roll my eyes at it when it's done poorly. I think it's done well enough here, but if you want to make your main character relatable to the audience, well, one thing that you as a writer know for a fact about your reader is that they like stories. So if you make your main character also like reading and stories, that also, it often makes them more relatable. Although these days there are audiobooks, but I actually like the way it's done here because I noticed that he did the same thing. I mean, when I say he, I mean Mike Ford, the author. He had the other character talk about some books that she was reading in the very first book, Don't Let the Doll In. And I think what he's doing, and you see it later on, is that he's actually just hanging his influences on his sleeve. He's saying, look, I was inspired by this book, it relates back to this, so I'm actually going to reference it by having the main character enjoy that book and talk about it in the story. And I think that's a clever way of throwing it in, because unless you want to write a bibliography at the end of your story like it's a friggin' book report, that's a cute way of throwing in that reference like, hey, this is another author I liked, they inspired this work. You can check them out if you want after you finish reading this. Oh, but just before they head off to town, I actually like this little moment. I think it encapsulates the whole dynamic here perfectly, because they leave the house and Sophia notices that her dad didn't lock the front door. So she asks him why, like, did he forget? And so we'll start with this little interaction here. What for? Her father said. This isn't the city. What could possibly happen in Sorrow's Hollow? Nothing, Sophia mumbled as she walked to the truck and got in. That's the problem. The hardware store was out of fans, and Sophia's mood had not improved by the time they finished picking up the other things they needed. Back outside, she looked around for the bookstore her father had mentioned. None of the stores really seemed like they might carry books, but one of the nearby windows was filled with some curious things. Sophia looked at the name painted on the door. Frightville, she said. Doesn't sound like a bookstore to me. Maybe whoever runs it knows where the bookstore is, her father suggested. Let's go ask. Sophia pushed the door open, and she and her father stepped inside. The store was stuffed with things, all kinds of things. Sophia didn't know where to look first. Her eyes moved from a clown marionette dangling from its strings to a large dollhouse in which a family of what appeared to be real mice was celebrating a birthday party. The store was eerie and magical all at once, like a junk shop and carnival combined, and Sophia wanted to examine everything. Then a man appeared, quite tall and quite thin. He wore a black suit and had silver hair and pale skin, as if he'd lived his whole life indoors and never seen the sun. I am Odds and Ends, he said in a low, smooth voice. Welcome to my shop. May I help you find something? I was actually looking for the bookstore, Sophia told him. I do have a number of books, the man said. He tilted his head, peering at Sophia with interest before lifting one long, bony finger and pointing it at her. But I think you're looking for something else. I am, Sophia said. Well, I couldn't find a fan at the hardware store. Said Mr. Ends, shaking his head. I don't think that's it. Sophia laughed. Well, unless you have a key that can open a locked trunk, I can't think of anything else. The man smiled. A key, he said thoughtfully. Now that I may be able to help you with. He walked away, going to a cupboard and opening it. When he came back, he was holding an old wooden box. He lifted the lid, and inside were dozens of keys of all shapes and sizes. He held the box out. Do they all open trunks? Sophia asked, looking at the jumble of keys. They open all kinds of things, Mr. Ends answered. How do I know which one to try? If it were me, said Mr. Ends, I would choose the one that seems the most lonely. Sophia nodded, but she didn't really understand what he meant. How could a key be lonely? It was just a piece of metal. Still, she looked closely at the keys in the box, and to her surprise, there was one that seemed to stand out from the others. Even more peculiar. There was nothing particularly interesting about it. It was definitely old, the kind of key Sophia knew was called a skeleton key, with a circular handle, a long shaft, and a tip featuring two tooth-like points. Other than that, it was hardly worth noticing. Still, she picked it up. This one, she said. The man shut the box. Ah, he said, you selected a witch key. Witch key? Said Sophia, like it belonged to a witch. Mr. N shook his head. Which, he said, because you can never be sure which thing it will open. Sophia laughed. Well, I hope it opens the trunk in our attic, she said. Do you? Asked Mr. Ends. Sophia nodded. Sure, she said. I want to see what's in there. The man looked at her, another smile playing at the corners of his mouth. In that case, he said, I have a feeling you'll find that this key is exactly what you're looking for. Gotta love that, man. I mean, there's just a thing, right, about like keys and books and doors and toys, dolls. Like, there are certain objects which seem to have a whole history behind them, which is potent with potential for stories. I love that kind of thing. But what's most important is our girl gets her key, and we basically skip to the next scene where she goes home, and she tries it in the lock, and of course, it works. So, what is inside this trunk? Well, at first it doesn't seem all that interesting. There is a teddy bear sitting in the corner of the trunk, and it looks very well loved. because it looks like it's been torn to bits, but also every single bit that's torn has been sewn back on. The missing eye has been replaced with a button, he's got patches all over him, and also there's just 2 coins, 2 pennies in the bottom left of the trunk. Apparently they're mildly rare, as they say, but they're not too expensive. But what's important is they both have a date of the 1800s on the back. But also, there's something in the corner that draws Sophia's eye, because there's a lump under the paper interior of this old trunk, and she peels it back and she sees that there is a letter hidden in the trunk. So she opens it, and it's not all that interesting, although it does give us information. It basically says, to my dear son, I'm sorry I couldn't be with you, but as it is your 11th birthday, I wish you a happy birthday, but when you finally get out of there, we'll spend it together, as I've got cake and ice cream and a party all ready for you. So this is our second clue about this occupant of this room, is that he wasn't there with his mother, which is rather odd. But Sophia learns 2 more things before this scene is over. So first of all, she sees written on the top of the trunk, well, the underside of the top in pencil, are the initials JBW. And then as she's looking at that, she hears a slam behind her and she jumps, and she thinks it might be her father, but it was just the door slamming shut, which she knows is unusual because there's no open windows in the attic, so no breeze to have slammed it. So she goes over to the door and she opens and closes it a few times to make sure that it's not locked her in. And that's when she sees there are scratch marks on the back of the door. They look like tally marks, but when she looks slightly closer, she realizes that they're not 4 lines and a cross, like a regular count of 5. Instead, there's 6 lines and a cross, which are 7, which she very quickly realizes must be weeks, and she counts all of them. She finds 12 complete sets of 7, which is about 3 months. Oh, and there's also one last incomplete one with just 3 scratches. Sophia, of course, does not know what this means, but the first thing that comes to her mind is that someone might have been locked in this room. So she goes downstairs, and her father asks if the key worked, and she immediately tells him about the coins. She doesn't tell him about the letter. Sophia asks if anything bad happened in the house, and her dad says that he doesn't think so, especially because if something creepy did happen, if this was haunted, well, that would be a selling point for his bed and breakfast. He'd love to get some articles and stuff about that. So he says, no, we could do a little bit of research, but the jackstraws who lived here had nothing to say about it. We can check the library, though. And then he says that they'll have to go to the hardware store later, because he's got a huge to-do list of, like, fix the paint, pull off the old wallpaper, fix the roof. There's a hole in the roof in the attic. So all these things to do. So I like there's a short scene how Sophia is helping her dad peel off the wallpaper, and while she hates all this, she finds it oddly satisfying to peel off wallpaper. And quick side note, depending how old the house is, that would not be fun, because my brother actually and his partner, they bought a house with old wallpaper, and the wallpaper was so old that peeling it off was like pulling teeth. It would never come off in one whole piece. So if you can manage to pull it off in one whole piece, that would be satisfying. But if this house is as old as it seems to be, it's more likely that you'll have to chip it off bit by bit. Now, they still want to go to the hardware store, but after pulling off the wallpaper, they're both exhausted, so they end up going to bed. But Sophia doesn't sleep very well. She's in bed, but that night, she hears footsteps upstairs that wake her up. At first she thinks, oh, maybe it's just Dad, but then she sees the clock, and it's 3:33 in the morning. Her father wouldn't be up there at all hours, especially after all the work he did that day. So she tries to get to sleep, but it happens again. These footsteps, and then a bang, like someone slamming the door shut. As much as she'd love to convince herself that it's some sort of an animal, that does sound like the door slamming. So after this happens 2 or 3 more times, she gets out of bed with her flashlight and she heads upstairs. So she heads up to the attic and she sees the door is slightly ajar. So she peers in, she looks around, and she can see nothing. So she decides, okay, well, it must just be a squirrel or something. Maybe like if they jumped down from the very top of the house and they landed down, they might have made a really big bang. I don't know. But all of these convenient explanations are thrust aside when she turns to look at the door to the attic, and she sees that last set of marks, the 3 marks after the set of 12, now has a 4th mark scratched into the door. Honestly, that gives me shivers. I think that's very well done. So the next day, our girl and her father, they head to the local library. And I really like this. This is an example of throwing in character that wasn't necessary for the story, but it's so much fun because they head to the library and the person there is an old woman, with her long hair tied in a braid, and she's wearing flannelette and overalls. Doesn't really look like a librarian. And when they introduce themselves, she explains why. It's because this isn't actually a public library. It works like that because she's a huge fan of books. She has so many books that she brings a bunch of her collection up here and people can borrow them as they see fit. But she's actually a dairy farmer, so she only ever runs the library when she's not busy tending to the cows, or if the cows are calving, she obviously has to take care of them then. But most importantly, they ask her if she knows anything about the Jackstraws, the people who owned the house before them, and she explains that she knew them rather well. It's a small town after all, and she happens to know there's only one of them left in town, Eddie Jackstraw. He was a kid when he lived in the house, but he now lives out by the lake, and he helps Gus to run an ice cream store. But more importantly than that, she knows because this house is actually somewhat famous. It used to be called Fever House. See, before it was a house that the Jackstraws lived in, it used to be a sanatorium. Now, I used to think that was just another name for a nut house, but no, a sanatorium is just a somewhat private hospital, as I understand. It was run by the Children's Wellness Society, and it was called Fever House because whilst it was a hospital in general, it was almost exclusively set up for people who suffered from scarlet fever. Scarlet fever was rampant in the late 1800s, and so they had to be separated from their parents because it was quite infectious. And now we understand why there was a boy away from his mother. Sophia asks if she knows about any of the people who live there, because after all, she knows the initials of one of them, JBW, and she says that she doesn't have any of that kind of information, but maybe if she wants more, she could go talk to Eddie Jackstraw. After all, he lives locally and he probably would fancy a chat. So Sophia and her dad thank Jack, the librarian, and she decides to shut up shop because she has to go tend to her cows. And Sophia and her dad head first to the grocery store because it's in the same little mini mall parking lot thing. And we get a fun moment with them, followed by an introduction of an important character. Sounds like our house has an interesting history, Sophia's father said as they went to the grocery store and got a cart. Yeah, Sophia agreed. She was thinking about the attic again, and about the kids who might have lived in there. Is scarlet fever really dangerous? She asked her father as he searched through a bin of onions looking for a perfect one. It can be, he said, and it certainly was back in the day, before they knew how to treat it. He placed the onion in the cart and looked at Sophia. You're thinking about all those sick kids, huh? Sophia nodded. It must have been really scary for them. I'm sure the people who ran the charity took good care of them, her father said. I bet they... Excuse me, said a woman. Are you Henry Flores? Sophia looked at the woman who had interrupted them. She was tall and thin, with pale white skin and black hair tucked into a tight bun at the base of her neck. She wore a simple white dress that made her look even more pale. Her only makeup was bright red lipstick that made her mouth look like a rose. Her eyes were a strange violet color, pretty, but also a little unnerving. Yes, her father answered her. I am, and you are? Melissa Huvert, the woman said. She held out a business card. I'm an interior designer. I hear you're renovating Fever House. Sophia found it curious that the woman didn't call the place the Jackstraw House like everyone else did. She wasn't old, so maybe she was just interested in history. I thought maybe you could use some help renovating the house, the woman continued. I've worked on many of the homes in town. I know it's a lot for one person to do, and he's not just one person, Sophia said. I'm helping too. Melissa Huvert looked down at Sophia and smiled tightly. Of course you are, she said. All I meant was that there are a lot of decisions to make when renovating a historic home, and I'd like to offer my services. Thank you, Sophia's father said. That's very kind of you. The woman smiled and tilted her head. For some reason, Sophia didn't like the way she was looking at her father. Sophia pulled on his sleeve. We need to get stuff for dinner, she reminded him. Right, her father said, shaking his head as if he'd forgotten. He smiled at Melissa Huvert. Thank you for the card, Mrs. Huvert, he said. Oh, there is no Mr. Huvert, the woman said. It's Miss Huvert, but you can call me Melissa. Okay, Melissa, said Sophia's father. Maybe you'll hear from me. I do hope I will, Melissa said as Sophia practically dragged her father away. Oh, and there's also a brief moment after this where she glances back at Melissa and she sees that her body seems to flicker. I'm not a big fan of that because I think it sort of making it a bit too obvious that she's a monstrous thing. I would have preferred that being later, but that's just a personal quirk. So I will say, though, I do quite like this, because it is the kind of real-world drama, even though there's obviously some supernatural things in play, it is the kind of real-world drama that real people would go through, the idea of their single father finding a partner that the kid doesn't like. Oh, because you all picked up on all the signals there, right? Like, they met in a grocery store, which is statistically the most likely place that people will meet another potential partner. The dad seemed very enthusiastic to talk to her. Also, the fact that she insisted that there was no Mr. Hoover. Like, all the signals were there. They were flirting, right? Right in front of the daughter, which is why she felt uncomfortable. Like, I do like the way that scene was done, with the obvious exception of her body shimmering and seeming slightly see-through for a moment, near the end where only Sophia could see. That was a bit much, but otherwise, interesting stuff. Especially because the next chapter opens and we learn that Sophia's dad did call Melissa to come over and give him a bit of a hand, which Sophia rightly is confused by because she doesn't understand the whole flirting thing, and so she's like, why do we need an interior designer? We can come up with ideas ourselves. And we already had ideas. Like, they'd already decided to paint the front room blue, but Melissa comes in and she says, oh, well, blue's a bit of a depressing color. We should do yellow, and we could save blue for one of the bedrooms, because there are 7 bedrooms. And I like the phrasing here, because she says, oh, and this house has 9 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms, right? And her dad's like, yeah, that's exactly right. But the way he responds, it sounds like he's a TV host on a quiz show, because he's that enthusiastic about this simple success from Melissa, so he's clearly deeply enamored with this woman. But thankfully, this awkward interaction with Sophia and Melissa is cut short when she turns and sees that there is a teddy bear sitting on one of the cabinets. That exact same bear that was in the trunk. And when Melissa sees it, she jumps as though she's seen a monster behind her. She freaks out, and she seems very upset by it. She says, where did that come from? And when Sophia says, yeah, it was from the trunk upstairs, she said, well, how did you get it open? And Sophia doesn't ask her how she knew it was locked, but she says, yeah, I just found a key. And Melissa seems very unsettled by this. So once she gets some lemonade from her dad, she says, I want to get out of here. So we should get out of here. And she says to Sophia, you should throw that thing out. It's gonna scare the guests. And her dad asks her if she'll be okay staying at home on her own for a little bit, because he and Melissa are going to go to the hardware store, get out some paint colors or something. And while Sophia doesn't like her dad hanging out with this woman, she actually says, yes, that's fine, because she has a plan of her own. So when her dad and Melissa get in the truck and head off, she heads up to that attic with the teddy bear, because she has a theory. I told you before about hanging influences on their sleeve. Well, that book she mentioned earlier, The Children of Green Know, is all about a house which has ghostly children in it. And so she heads into the attic, and she says out loud, as loudly as she can, look, I don't know what you are, but if you are what I think you are, then I would like to be your friend if you're okay with that. And then she hears some mattress springs squeaking, and she sees that there's now a little divot in one of the cots. She's not sure if it was there before, but she heads closer, saying, is that you? So she holds out the teddy bear, and sure enough, something pulls it from her hand, and it floats in the air for a second, and then squeezes in the middle as though someone were giving it a hug. And then it sits on the bed beside the small divot where this ghostly figure must be sitting. And it seems to pause for a moment, and so Sophia responds, well, I guess I'll take that as a yes. And a quick side note here to say, I think one of the reasons why I like this so much is that is so well done. We get first introduced to this by the noises and the slamming and the scratches, just the hint of it being there. And then the first time we see it, it's unable to speak, it's not even visible, it's completely invisible. And so we just see its interactions with things, right? And so it's this slow build-up. We still don't know if it's good or bad. We simply know that it's a child. And then the next scene, it gets even more intense. So in the next scene, so our girl goes to bed the next day, she wakes up, and her dad is in a very good mood, even though it's a miserable day and it's raining. And he's just decided to talk about the paint colors that he and Melissa picked out, and Sophia gives it a glance but doesn't really care because, again, they could pick out their own colors. And her dad is really excited, obviously, because he has a date tonight, because he says that Melissa said that there's a nice Thai place in town, they want to get together, talk about the house, and he asks Sophia if she'd like to come, and she says, no, not really, you two should go. And even though she is not interested at all at spending time with Melissa, she's a little hurt when her dad just says, oh, okay, and doesn't seem to fight for it at all. He seems more interested in spending time with Melissa, which, that does cut a little deep. So they spend a little time during the day just fixing up bits in the house, but what's important is that we skip through that until the evening when her dad gets in the truck to head off to meet Melissa. And Sophia's fine with this because she has plans that night. And I love this. This is rather clever. As soon as he was gone, Sophia went into action. Going to her room, she took out a word game from her closet. Then she gathered up a flashlight and several of the battery-powered candles her father had bought in case the power went out, and carried everything up to the attic. When she got there, she discovered that the plastic her father had stapled over the holes in the roof the day before had mostly worked to keep the rain out. There was only one spot he had missed. Water dripped onto the floor below, but only a little bit. She arranged the candles on the floor. When she turned the candles on, she was surrounded by a soft glow, almost as if they were real candles. This made her feel like she was inside a warm cocoon. The rain continued to patter on the roof overhead, and thunder growled like an angry animal, but Sophia felt safe. Opening the board from the game, she laid it on the floor in front of her. Then she took the tiles that had letters printed on them and placed them right side up around the board, leaving an open space in the center. When she was done, she looked around the room. Okay, she said. I don't know if this will work or not, but I'm going to try. I know you can move things around, so if you want to talk to me, move the tiles to spell words, okay? She waited, staring down at the board in front of her. For a minute, nothing happened. Then one of the tiles, a Y, slid from its position on the left side of the board and moved to the clear spot in the middle. This was followed by an E, then an S. Yes, Sophia said, her heart beating excitedly. The spirit was talking to her. Good, that's good. She had so many questions, she didn't know what to ask next. She decided to start with, what's your name? This time the tiles moved more quickly, as if the spirit had gotten the hang of moving them and was eager to talk. John, it spelled. Nice to meet you, John, Sophia said. I'm Sophia, but the spirit wasn't done. Next it spelled out Bradley. Then there was a pause and it started a new word. Watson appeared underneath the first two names. John Bradley Watson, Sophia said. That's a good name. Then she remembered the letters written inside the lid of the trunk. JBW, she said. So the trunk did belong to you. How old are you, John? The tile spelling out the spirit's name was swept back with the others and a new word formed. 11. A year older than me, Sophia said. We could be in the same grade in school, though, because I skipped ahead. She hesitated, not knowing how to phrase her next question. It was a big one. Are you a ghost? She asked. Yes, John wrote. Although Sophia had pretty much known that must be the answer, she still felt sad. How did she become a ghost? Outside, a huge crack of lightning split the sky. Sophia jumped. The rain intensified, beating angrily on the roof. On the board, the tiles began to swirl around, faster and faster. The letters became a blur, then flew off the board in all directions, scattering across the attic floor. Then a wind swept through the attic. Weirdly, the battery-powered candles went out, as if they were the real kind, leaving Sophia in the dark.
She reached for her flashlight and switched it on.
But it didn't work. She tried the button several times, but it was as if something had drained the batteries. She was sitting in pitch blackness. John, she said, did you do that? There was no answer. John, she tried again. It's okay, we're friends, remember? I want to help you. Again, the only response was the sound of the storm howling around the house. Okay, Sophia said. I guess you're not ready. I'll try again. But could you make my flashlight work, please? I don't want to fall down the stairs. She waited. A few seconds later, her flashlight came on. Thanks, Sophia said. I absolutely adore this scene so much, because not only does it show just how clever our main character is. I mean, she realized that the ghost had limitations and it couldn't speak, so she found a way to talk to it. That's really clever. And then the fact that it shows that she was brave enough to do this, because she still doesn't know this thing's intentions. It has the thing scratched into the door. It obviously is slamming things at night, like a poltergeist or something. So she obviously had to be really brave for that. And then there's the fact that this ghost thing, it builds up the tension there because, yes, it's a child and they seem relatively innocent and excited to play and talk to people, but as soon as she starts talking about his death, it suddenly becomes violent, throwing the pieces around the place, so we don't know if it's good or bad. Oh, this is just perfection. I don't think that you could improve this without changing the intent of the scene. It is so well done. Especially even that little end bit. Like, it's so cute, but it shows that they're still friends. How she says, look, can you turn on my flashlight? And he does that. So clearly, even though he lost his temper, he feels sorry. Like, I love this, non-verbal communication. It is so well done. And even the scene ends, like, after this, she goes to her room after packing up all the stuff, and she says, I just talked to a ghost. That's weird, man. Like, and she's reflecting on that, like, that's really cool. So it shows that, obviously, this book is self-aware that that is a weird thing to do, but it's still really cool, right? And then the next scene, we see that while she's been off on her own little ghost adventure, her father has been off on his own little romantic adventure. In fact, he says that he and Melissa are going to go for a picnic. And of course, Sophia notices that he doesn't even try to invite her this time. But again, she's fine with that because she has her own plans. She wants to go talk to the last jackstraw left in town. So she heads to the Frosty Freeze, the ice cream shop. And in my opinion, this is another great character scene, which also moves the plot forward. Like, this is why I love this so much, because these scenes are multifaceted. It's not only a cute scene introducing these two new characters of Ed and Gus, but it's also moving the plot ahead. It's so efficient and also really fun to read. There she was greeted by a man with twinkling blue eyes and silver hair buzzed into a flat top. Welcome to the Frosty Freeze, he said warmly. What can I get you? Are you Edward Jackstraw? Sophia asked. I'm Gus, the man answered. Then he turned and called out, Eddie, there's a young lady here to see you. Then he turned back to Sophia. He's not in any trouble now, is he? He asked, pretending to sound serious. Well, he might be a suspect in a break-in, Sophia said. I'm going to need to ask him a few questions. Who is it? A man asked, appearing from the back of the shop and wiping his hands on a dish towel. I didn't get a name yet, Gus said, but I hear you've been on a crime spree. Is that what you're doing on those nights you tell me you're playing poker with the boys? Edward Jackstraw peered out of the window at Sophia. Like Gus, he had silver hair, but his was a little longer. Also, he wore glasses and his eyes were brown. You look a little young to be a detective, he said. My name is Sophia Flores, Sophia told him. I live in your old house. Jack at the library told me you might be able to tell me a little bit about it. Well, I might be able to, Edward said. How about I come out there and we sit and talk at one of the picnic tables? What are you having? A root beer float, please, Sophia said. Coming right up, Gus said. You two go talk. I'll bring it out to you. Sophia walked over to one of the picnic tables placed in the grass behind the Frosty Freeze. A moment later, Edward Jackstraw came and sat across from her. Mum and Pop mentioned that some nice people bought the place, he said. How are you liking it? It's good, Sophia said. Mostly. Mostly? Edward said. Is there something wrong? Sophia wasn't sure how to answer him. Jack said the house used to be a sanatorium, she said. For sick kids. Edward nodded. That's right. Do you know if any of those kids died? Sophia asked. Edward sighed. Scarlet fever was pretty serious. Some of them did. There's actually a section of the Sorrows Hollow Cemetery for them. Sophia hesitated. Do you know if any of them died from other things? She asked. Other things? Said Edward. Like what? Like maybe murder? Sophia said, just as Gus arrived with her float. Murder? Gus said, setting the float down. You said he was just a burglar. Is there something else I should know? Get back to work, Edward teased. If your boss sees you goofing off like this, he'll fire you. Oh yeah, Gus said. If he fires me, then my boss isn't getting the meatloaf he likes so much for dinner tonight. He looked at Sophia. If he gives you any trouble, you call me. I used to be a police officer and I still have some moves. Sophia laughed as Gus walked away. She liked Gus and Edward almost as much as she disliked Melissa. So what's this about? Edward said as Sophia stirred the ice cream in her float. Now that she'd started the conversation, Sophia wasn't sure how to proceed. She wanted to tell Edward everything, but it sounded so ridiculous. Did you ever experience anything unusual while you lived in the house? She asked instead. Unusual how? Said Edward, looking at her with interest. Like, in the attic? Sophia said. Noises, things moving around on their own. For a moment, Edward looked nervous. So, he said, you've met the ghost. Sophia set her spoon down. You know about John Bradley Watson? You named him? I didn't name him, Sophia explained. That's just his name. How do you know that? Edward asked. He, told me, said Sophia. Last night. Edward looked surprised. He talked to you? Sophia shook her head. Then she explained what she had done with the tiles. When she was finished, Edward laughed. "That's very clever," he said. "I wish I'd thought of doing that." "But you believe me," Sophia said, "about there being a spirit." "I do," Edward said. "When I was a boy, I often heard someone moving around in the attic, but none of my brothers and sisters did, and they all said I was making it up." "You weren't," Sophia assured him. "He's there." "I never actually went into the attic," Edward told her. "I was too afraid. You're really brave to have done it." Sophia shrugged. "Thanks," she said coolly, but inside she was really pleased about being called brave. "I asked John how he became a ghost," Sophia continued. "He wouldn't answer me. I think if he died from scarlet fever, he probably wouldn't be upset about saying so." She sipped her root beer float, enjoying the creamy sweetness of it while she waited for Edward to say something. Anne was looking at her with a strange expression, part sad and part afraid. Sophia wondered if she had said something wrong. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "I just hadn't thought about her in a long time," Edward said. "Her?" said Sophia. "The woman in white," Edward said. "That's what I called her. I used to dream about her a lot. I don't know who she was, really. A nurse of some kind, maybe? But the dream was always the same. I was in a bed in the attic, sick, and she would come in with a tray of food, a bowl of soup and some bread. But I knew that the soup was poisoned and that I shouldn't eat it. She would always bring it to me and try to give it to me. I would start yelling, then wake up in my own bed. It happened almost every night for about a year." "Then what?" Sophia asked. "The dreams just stopped," said Edward, "right around my 12th birthday." "John said he was 11, Sophia said. "Maybe when you turned 12, your connection to him stopped." Edward Jackstraw looked at her. "You're a very interesting girl," he said. "I like to think about things," Sophia said. "I wonder if you were dreaming about what happened to John, like maybe he was trying to show you." "Maybe," said Edward. "All I know is I was really glad when the dreams stopped. Then I forgot all about them. Until now." Oh, fantastic. So, there's so much I love about this scene. First of all, yeah, if you're waiting for your queer characters, ta-da! I mean, I'm surprised I forgot about this because that's the most explicit I've ever seen in a kid's book, that these two men have been living together for a long time. They live together, they love each other. They're a very sweet couple. Of course, there is that line that says that Sophia liked them about as much as she hated Melissa. We're going to talk about that a little bit more at the end. But more importantly, this is something I've always enjoyed because, especially in the 90s, they had this whole thing of like, kids rule, parents drool kind of thing. Like, kids don't need to worry about their parents. Parents suck, man. And so I've always liked it that there's been this sort of flip. I don't know if it's happened. I think it actually sort of happened early 80s more so and then a bit later 90s. But they still had the idea that kids experience things that only kids can experience because there's like an age cutoff limit, but the parents still remember. And I've always liked that, like especially this idea of the old and the young get together because the old have memories of that time and they can offer advice, whereas the young have the energy and spirit to actually go forth on the adventure that the older person never accomplished because the story's still going on. Like, I've always loved that kind of interaction. I've loved that trope, and this is exploring that. And of course, I always love it when you have an active, intelligent protagonist, and Sophia is active and brave, and I even like that little bit how she admits, like, and the same thing, when I was a kid, the same thing, if someone called me brave, I'd be like, oh, yeah, but inside I'd be chuffed to bits, I love all of this. It is so well done, and it's really engaging, especially because whilst they're having this fun little chat, we know that something dark is happening with her dad, with this Melissa character, who has been hinted at twice now. I skipped the second one because it was boring, where we've seen that she was partially see-through. In fact, I think I would prefer this book if they got rid of that first one altogether. It's just a personal quirk because once she gets to know her and sees her freak out over the teddy bear and she starts to flicker, that makes more sense to me. But you see what I mean? Like, we've got a nice little light tension relieving moment where we're learning stuff. At the same time, in the background, we know that her dad is falling deeper and deeper into the clutches of this Melissa woman. Like, I just love that balance of tension, especially after this conversation ends and it was Eddie, Gus is his partner. Eddie says, look, I don't know too much more than this. I'll look into it a little bit for you. And so they exchange phone numbers so they can get in touch. And then Sophia heads back home to hear the horrendous news. Her father and Melissa got engaged. Her father and Melissa are standing in the house, arm in arm, telling her this, and Melissa is saying, yes, I've always wanted a daughter. So of course Sophia snaps and says, I'm not your daughter, you are not my mother. Then she races up the stairs, heads to her bedroom, and slams the door shut. Her father comes upstairs to talk to her, and even though she says, I'm sleeping, he comes in anyway and says, look, I know this is a surprise, but, I've really fallen for her, and I think that once you get to know her, you'll have her too. But Sophia starts telling him some of the things she knows. Like she says stuff that she shouldn't know, even though she said she's not from this town. She must be lying. And when he says, where'd you hear this from? She says, I heard it from Edward, but she realizes that she's been talking to a stranger her dad doesn't know. So when he says, who is that? She says, look, never mind, right? It's just, you can't trust her. I don't trust her. And her dad says, look, I understand you not liking her, but I'm disappointed that you'd be making up lies. In fact, I think you need to apologize. You owe me and her an apology. And of course, when Sophia refuses, he says, you know what, if you're going to act like this, you might as well stay here and don't come downstairs until you've thought about what you've said and come down to apologize. And then he leaves and slams the door behind him. And Sophia's like on the verge of tears. Her dad would never talk to her like that. And also, I like that she's like, well, obviously this Melissa woman is doing something to him, like some sort of power over him. And I like that eventually, spoiler, we will learn that this is true, but in this very first scene, when it's just he's fallen for her and he's acting strange, it might just be all in Sophia's head. This could just be a man who's fallen for a woman and he's defensive of her because, well, he loves her. Sophia doesn't know what to do about Melissa, but rather than sulk in her room, she decides that she'll talk to the only other friend she has in the house. She gets out the word game and a flashlight and the candles. She sneaks back to the attic upstairs, and we get a little bit more information. So after apologizing and saying, look, I know you got upset, but can we talk again? He spells out, yes. So she says, okay, I spoke to Edward Jackstraw. He used to live here. Did you know him? And he responds, no. And she says, he wasn't really sure what happened to you, but I'd like to talk to you about that. Are you okay talking about that? And after a long pause, he does spell out, yes. She says, okay, so you had scarlet fever, and that's why you were here. But I like it. The letters don't move at all, so she's assuming that he still means yes. And she says, but that's not how you died, is it? And this time, he moves the letters and spells out no. She says, yeah, I didn't think so. But then, before she can ask the next question, the letters start moving, and they spell out Olive. Olive says, is that a person? But before he answers, he still spells out even more, and he spells out Mosshart. And just for the sake of drama, right as he spells out the name Olive Mosshart, there is a crack of thunder, and the flames of the candles flickered, even though, once again, they are battery powered, they are not regular candles. So Sophia says, now look, I know this is hard, but Edward told me he had a dream about someone, a woman, trying to poison him. Is that what happened? And then the tiles spelled out, yes. And then the air around Sophia seems to crackle with electricity. She thought it was just the thunder before, but now it's becoming more intense, and the air in front of her began to shimmer until it forms into a shape of a young boy. Sophia smiles and nods and says, John, it's nice to meet you. And the boy nodded in response, because unfortunately he still can't speak. So she asks him, did you make those marks on the door? And he nodded. And she said, so it's that Olive Mosshart woman. She poisoned you. And again, he nodded, but this time she can see that he looks furious. And thunder cracked overhead once more, as he does. Sophia asks, were you the only one? And grimly, he shakes his head. She says, do you know why? And he shook his head once more. She says, okay, you don't know, fair enough. We'll try to figure that out, but at least we have a name. And she goes to ask him something else, but then there's a knock at the door, interrupting her. And it's her father calling out, Sophia, what are you doing in there? And as he's rattling the door handle, she hears Melissa call out, need to get it open, tell her to open it right now. And at the sound of Melissa's voice, John's spirit glowed even brighter, and as she watched, without him touching it, the things on the board, the name Olive Mosshart, started moving to rearrange themselves, and they spell out Melissa Huvert. And finally the pieces fall into place, because Olive Mosshart and Melissa Huvert are the same person. Now, I will say, personally, I'm not a big fan of anagram names, mostly because as a writer and a word nerd, I can kind of tell anagrams pretty easily. Like heck, without writing it down, I can tell you Melissa can become a Slimes, and Mosshart can become hears most. So yeah, I picked up the anagram thing right away, but I do appreciate in kids' books, and also I think this is a quirk that not everyone's good at, especially because I've gone to some trivia nights, and I can sometimes see stuff that others can't. But yeah, there are some people also who can get it quicker than me, so that's the thing. It's a skill that some people have, especially if they have some kind of a eulexia, let's say, because if you have dyslexia, I do apologize. This obviously would be a lot more difficult for you. But that aside, like I said, this is a kid's book, and so it's the perfect place to throw in stuff like that. And more importantly, we now know why this woman is shimmering. She is clearly some kind of a ghost thing herself. Now, the next chapter starts with a bit of a time skip, because after they saw her in the room and she refused to explain what she was doing, Melissa insists that she is, and I quote, up to something, and so her father and Melissa decide to lock her in her room. And so she's locked in her room when she gets a text message from Edward saying, I have some information. And at first, she wants to text back and say, look, I can't, I'm locked in my room, I'm grounded, or whatever, when she gets an idea. She doesn't usually like defying her father, but clearly something's wrong with him. It's this Melissa woman, so she decides that she will sneak out. So she opens the window, and she sneaks out onto the roof, and she can see her father and Melissa downstairs talking. I mean, the front yard. It is downstairs, but they're outside talking. And her dad's feeling a bit bad about locking her in, but Melissa insists, no, you've been far too lenient with her. And her dad says, yeah, but this is really tough on her. Melissa says, you know what, I think you're right. When she comes out, as a peace offering, I'll make for her some of my vegetable soup. It's my own special recipe. So Sophia finds a way to climb down the side of the house, and she heads off to the frosty freeze where she meets up with Eddie, who was waiting for her. Gus shows her that he found a newspaper article saying that in quick succession 12 people died at Fever House, and the nurse who was running the facility for the Children's Wellness Society, he shows a picture of her, and it is 100% Melissa Hoover. It's wearing a different outfit, like a nurse's uniform, but that's her. And when Sophia says as much, Edward says, that is impossible. This photo is like 125 years old. It's got to be an ancestor or something. Sophia says, no, it's definitely this woman, and when she insists, Edward actually starts to believe her because she also looks exactly like the woman from his dreams. And whilst I do like that just for the kids in the back, with the cheap seats who didn't quite figure out the full mystery, this sort of lays it out so everyone understands it. But most importantly, we also get that earlier scene with, learning about the soup and that she's going to feed her poison soup. But right now, after they've discussed all this, Sophia says, I think I know why it's happening. The reason why Melissa came out is because I opened the trunk. I was told that key could open just about anything, so what if it didn't just open the trunk? What if it opened a door to the other side and let Melissa out? That's why she says that she's from out of town, and yet she knows so much about here. That's why she's targeting my father. She wants control of Fever House back. And that's why she's so scared of the teddy bear, because she knows it's from one of those children, and they know what she did. Now, quick side note before we get to the next scene, because, like I said, I really like this even though it's a ghost story, and I think that besides the fact that it's really well written, I think this is the reason why, because I don't like it when people start spreading this idea that ghosts are just hanging around, as though it's just a natural thing. Like, it's been said that back in the day, when there was the whole satanic panic, there was a lot of television shows that had the devil appear. And these weren't sci-fi shows or supernatural shows, they were regular dramas like your soap operas. But the reason the devil could show up is because people didn't think of it as all that supernatural. They were like, yeah, the devil's real, so they'll just randomly show up. And I've never liked that, especially as it's continued to perpetuate now, because it perpetuates this idea. And I'll talk about it later, but I think the reason why I like it so much here is that we've clearly said that this key, the witch key, has some ability to make these ghosts come back and appear. And so I think that's enough of a supernatural excuse. It's what I was talking about before, about being honest. And honestly, we know that magical keys don't exist. And so that can excuse and add that suspension of disbelief as to how the ghosts exist here. I think that's enough of an explanation to make me happy that this story isn't perpetuating this belief in ghosts. But again, I will talk about that a little bit more at the end. What matters now is that our girl goes home and she sees that everything has gone wrong because her father is sitting at the table and Melissa, quote unquote, is stirring a pot of soup. And her dad is sitting at the table, and he has glazed over eyes, so we can tell that he's been hypnotized, brainwashed, something, but clearly he's not himself, as he says, "Here, come sit, join us, eat the soup." And Melissa gives them both some soup, and our girl Sophia says, "No, I'm not eating a single thing that this woman has made." And when her father says, "No, here, you should eat some," and even Melissa says, "Look, there's nothing wrong with it," and she takes a spoonful and eats it. And Sophia says, "Yeah, but it wouldn't affect you because you're already dead." And Melissa laughs at this, thinking, "Oh, she thinks I'm a zombie, does she?" And Sophia says, "I don't know what you are, a ghost, a monster, something, but there's something wrong with you." And her dad says, "Look, I'm sick of this, just eat your soup, like this is ridiculous." And in fact, he goes to eat some of his own soup, and Sophia jumps up and says, "No, don't eat it," and she smacks the spoon out of his hand. And this is enough to make her father get mad and say, "Look, I've had enough of this. I think you should go to your room and we'll come and have a talk to you later." And Sophia says, "Fine, but don't you eat any of that soup." So she goes up to her room and she sees the key sitting there, as well as the 2 coins that she found in the trunk. And as she's rubbing them between her fingers, she gets an idea. She decides that she needs to talk to John once again. So taking the key and the 2 coins, she sneaks out of her room into the attic. And she can't see John, but she can see the teddy bear sitting on his bed where he was sitting before. So she takes the teddy bear, puts it in the center of the room, and then she sits down next to it, cross-legged, and holds the both coins in her hand. And she begs and she says, "John, I need your help. Olive Mosshart is here, and she wants to hurt me like she did to you, but I don't know how to stop her." And as she says that, the air in front of her begins to shimmer and shine, and John Bradley Watson appears once again. John then opened her hands and gave the coins to him and said, "Look, these belong to you. Your mother sent them. I want you to have them." And as soon as he touches something given to him by his mother, his ghostly fingers seem to glow and become warm and even more substantial, so that suddenly, when the light fades, he no longer looks see-through. He looks whole, like a living child, if one who has stepped out of time. So finally they get to talk, and she says, "Look, thank you so much. I need your help." And he says, "Of course, I want to help. She was the one who poisoned us. I was actually here to stop her. That's the reason why I was here, because she killed me, but even as a ghost, I managed to get her ghastly form and trap it inside of my trunk. That's why it was locked." And Sophia apologizes, saying, "Look, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to let her out. I got the key." And he says, "No, it's all right. You didn't mean to do it. She was waiting this whole time for someone like you to make a mistake like that. It's not your fault. But more importantly, if you still have the key, we can use that same power to trap her in there once again." And as they're talking, they hear a banging on the door, because it's, of course, Melissa saying, "Open this door, it's time for your soup, young lady." And Sophia looks at John saying, "Oh, we've run out of time, I don't know what to do." And John calmly says, "Let her in." So Sophia opens the door, and Melissa steps in, but as she walks through the door, her form shifts. The modern white dress disappears and becomes a nurse's outfit as she walks into the room and says, "I have your soup, young lady." And Sophia says, "I'm not going to eat it, I'm not touching that stuff." And behind her, John says she doesn't want it. And as Melissa hears the boy's voice, she drops the plate and smashes on the ground, and she turns and sees, "You!" And John says that he's not afraid of her anymore. He used to be, but he knows that she is just a spirit like him. She doesn't have any power here. And so he runs forward at her, shoving her, and she yells for him to stop, but he says, "You can't stop me." And he slams into her and pushes her into the trunk. And as he's forcing her down, his hands are busy, so he yells to Sophia. He says, quick, shut the trunk." And so Sophia has to run forward and slam the top of the trunk and quickly jam in the key and twist it. The whole while, Olive Mosshart is screaming out, "No, I don't want to go back. I won't go back." But as soon as the key is turned and clicked, the attic falls deathly silent. After talking with John and seeing that, yes, now he could probably move on, Sophie goes running downstairs to check on her father, and she sees him, but he seems to be blinking as though he just woke up. He says, "Was I sick? Everything is foggy. I don't remember what happened." And she said, "Yes, you had a fever, but you're feeling better now." And he says, "Oh, so did you make me soup?" But before he can grab it, she says, "You don't want to eat that." She grabs it, pours it down the sink, and says, "It's gone cold. I'll make you some more soup." And so, yeah, she gets some canned soup to feed him. But everything is all tying up here, so There's one last moment after she eats soup with her dad and they go to bed that night, and she awakens, or at least she feels like it, because she's having a dream where she goes into the attic and she sees John standing there, but there is a woman standing behind him, and she freaks out and yells, but John says, no, it's okay, that's not Olive. That's my mother. She's here to come take me away. And he says, look, for everything you've done for me, I want to give this back to you. And so he gives her a coin and says, this is for everything you've done for me. And she hands him the key and says, well, this is just in case you ever want to come back and see me ever again. And then John and his mother walk off and they fade into the light. And then our girl wakes up and she wonders if maybe it was all a dream, but she sees in one of her hands, she is holding an old nickel, one of the two from the trunk. And she decides that tomorrow she's going to ride out to the Frosty Freeze to talk to Ed, because the story of what happened to these children deserves to be told, and maybe together they can find enough evidence to finally tell the true ghost story. The end. So, what is there to say about this book except, wow, I really enjoyed that one. Even, like I said, the only issues that you could possibly find are the fact that it's not got the deepest plot in the world, but that's the thing, it's for kids. So that all being said, I think I adore this book so much. I love how much Sophia is an active protagonist, that she's actively thinking and working these things out. Honestly, I don't know if it's just a thing in America, but when I watch American television, it has always annoyed me that they will put all the pieces on the table for the audience to put things together, and the characters will look at it, and then it's almost like 2 minutes too late, the characters will go, oh, I get it, it's this, and then they'll explain it to the audience like you're an idiot, even though I solved it as soon as I saw the pieces. Yet this book for kids has our girl, as soon as she sees the 7 tally mark, she goes, okay, well, that's got to be weeks. That's the only thing that's in 7s that you'd bunch up like that. And as soon as she hears that Edward could no longer talk to John, she thinks, well, it must be an age thing, because that's the only reason why after turning 12 you stop hearing him, and he did say he was 11. She's very clever, very brave, a fantastic protagonist for this story. And then the fact that the conflict, it seems like, is the conflict the ghost in the attic? And no, that's actually a good character. The conflict is this strange woman that suddenly appeared in her life and started dating her father, and then they get engaged very quickly. Even though it turns out that it's supernatural, even if that wasn't the case, the fact that someone met a woman and became engaged to her 3 days later, that's weird. That is definitely drama, potent drama right there. Although I will say just one little thing, right? I appreciated the queer representation in this story a lot, but when it comes to the queer themes, I have to say there's one that I started to pick at, and like I said, I said it myself. It was the one line said by Sophia: I liked Ed and Gus almost as much as I disliked Melissa. Now, I can't help but read into that it's talking about this beautiful relationship between two loving people, and how a relationship between two men can be so much better than this broken relationship, this abusive, mind-controlling relationship between a man and a woman. I think that there's a lot there. My only downside is that a lot of this coming from the child's perspective just makes it seem like she's bitching about the fact that she's going to get a new mother that she didn't ask for. But I do like the potential reading saying that, love is love, and just because it's straight love doesn't mean it's healthy. Because yes, in this book, the only relationship that is worth having is between Gus and Edward, because it's a loving relationship where they joke about one another. It's really cute. And then there's this gorgeous woman who sneaks in like a viper to steal away the father of this young girl and literally poison him. So there's an interesting queer reading there of the idea of how people are so busy demonizing the idea of non-heterosexual love that they ignore the fact that love is not enough. You also need friendship and trust and communication. All the things, all of the relationship goals that we see with Eddie and Gus. So I think that's interesting. Although, like I said, there's the potential reading there that straight love is scarier, because there's the whole thing of the woman being traditionally beautiful, but in a way that's kind of creepy with the rose mouth and the violet eyes. But I think that, the only downside there is that the protagonist being a child means that she has a bias which can then be empathetically led onto the reader to think that that's leading her to see it as gross from the outset. But again, that's another example, like I talked about before, how it's unfair to take this sort of a harsh reading just because the writer is gay. Because that does lead into the potential concept, it's like he's representing the idea that straight love is scary, which, I mean, I can understand that perspective sympathetically, but I don't think that was his intent. So I prefer to read this into the idea that it's talking about how it doesn't matter who you're with, it just matters that the love is healthy. So yeah, besides the little minor quirks that I've mentioned, I don't really think I have a bad word to say about this book. So, actually, hold on. There is one thing, but it's not actually bad writing. It's just a thing that I noticed, and I had to stop and do a little bit of research on it. When our girl decides to talk to John Bradley Watson, she uses a word game. Now, based on both the way that the game is described, and also each one of the chapters in this book has a tiny illustration, and the illustration for that chapter has tiles that look like Scrabble tiles. And so it's pretty blatantly obvious to me that the word game that she gets out is Scrabble, and yet it's not named in the book. And I find that a little bit distracting. But whilst I found that distracting and a little annoying, I don't blame Mike Ford for that, because there's a whole lot into that. In fact, that's one of the things I want to talk about, the things we can learn from this book. So before we get into that, like I said, I can't really find a fault with this book, and so it has to be an A+. Perfect story. The only way to change it would be to change the writer, and then even then, that's just changing the style. That's not changing the story. I think it was really, really well done. So A+, top marks. I told you this guy was a good writer. I'm glad you stuck it out with me so I could prove it to you. So what can we learn from this book? Well, I just told you what the lesson's going to be about. It was the fact that he didn't use the word Scrabble. And that might seem really weird at first. Like, why wouldn't you just call it Scrabble? It's a game, right? Everyone knows the game Scrabble. Well, here's the thing, right? I have two opinions on this. One of them is from a legal perspective, one of them is from a literary perspective. And so we'll start with the legal, but of course, I have to do the common disclaimer. I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. This is legal opinion from a person who's not a lawyer based on some basic research I've done. And that's the other thing. If you want to do better research, you should talk to a lawyer. But because you often need to talk to a lawyer about this stuff, that's why a lot of people do what Mike did in this book, and that's they take the safe route. See, in a book, when talking about a real-world product, their name is often a trademark or registered trademark. So don't go worrying about copyright. Copyright is a whole mess thanks to American legal bullcrap as far as I'm concerned. But trademark is important because a lot of people worry about the way their trademark is used. So obviously in your story, if your character is drinking a Pepsi, you can say, my character drank a Pepsi. That's fine. If your character drives a certain car, you can say, I drive an Audi, I drive or whatever. That's fine. The issue is one of two aspects. One of them is genericizing. So a lot of people these days will say, oh yeah, I Googled that and I found this information. Now, the thing is, Google doesn't like you doing that because what it's called is genericizing a term. And when they say that, they mean it's basically turning the word into a regular word that people use. So, for example, let's look at the word sick. Back in the day, sick just meant sick. It meant you were unwell. But it started to shift over time to mean, oh man, that's fully sick. Oh man, that's so sick, bro. Meaning really awesome, really cool. And so that's what language does. It evolves over time. And so meanings can shift. But corporations and businesses that own trademarks do not want that to happen because they want their brand to represent a certain concept. Google wants to represent having a large collection of information for people. And so if you start turning that into searching for stuff, I personally would argue, and feel free to if you disagree, but I can argue that if you say, oh, I Googled that, you could even say, oh, I Googled something on Yahoo, or I Googled something on Bing. Arguably, that's not wrong, because Google means to look up on a search engine, usually Google, but because it's becoming genericized, Google can't control that. So they hate that stuff. They never want you to use that. And so if you're ever using a product name in your story as a gerund or turning a noun into a verb or genericizing it, then you may be in trouble because they need to protect their trademark, so you might get sued by misusing their product name, right? Because you are literally diluting it in the public consciousness. So that's the first issue. So if you're using it properly as the actual name of the product, that's perfectly fine. The second issue is libel. Because if, for instance, I have in my story that my character drank a Pepsi and they hated the taste so much that they vomited, you're literally telling everyone this drink is so gross that it will make you vomit. Now, even if that's true for you, it could be libelous and they may want to sue you. Like another example is if you have a character use a tool, you name the brand of the tool and it breaks, you're saying that this is a broken tool. And so, like, honestly, even if it's true, it does mean that you might get sent to court and you'd have to defend your position in court. And whilst there is a potential you'd win, that's so expensive that most people just don't want to deal with that. So in this book, my cat, our girl, used the game of Scrabble wrong, which is fine, she was using the tiles, but the issue is that she was using it as a Ouija board. Now, even though Hasbro does sell Ouija boards, by doing that, she's implying that Scrabble could potentially contact the other side, and because there's a whole lot of spiritualists and people who are scared of the supernatural, they're very superstitious, by associating that word game with the ability to talk to ghosts, potentially could be libelous. And so just to be safe, Mike Ford decided to just say a word game generically. And that's perfectly fine, because the alternative would be for him to hire a lawyer, pay them an exorbitant amount of money, because lawyers are way too expensive, although that's a whole other rant. But rather than pay a lawyer just to ask, can I use this word without getting sued, just play it safe and took it out just to make sure that nobody got upset. Now that's perfectly fine, although my opinion is, I like it when people can throw in a few brands now and then, but legally speaking, so long as you're being respectful and there's no potential that you're genericizing the term, there's nothing wrong with it. But I will say, from a literary perspective, as a writer, I like to use brand names very, very sparingly. You know, I actually mentioned in the other review that I like that stupid movie about the unicorns in space, because I find that kind of thing really silly and fun, because you can throw in your own ideas and mess around with them. And so I actually kind of prefer making up my own names. And so if anything, the reason I like putting in real name brands is because by putting Pepsi alongside Fizzy Biz or something, then it makes Fizzy Biz seem slightly more realistic because it's in the same, you know, by association, it feels more real. And heck, if a kid doesn't realize that I've made that name up, then they might assume it's real. So there you go, like, it sort of builds it up that way. And like I said, I do geek out about these silly names, especially when people make up TV shows and a teeny little synopsis saying what it's about. That's always kind of fun. You sort of see either what they find funny or what they find interesting because they're like parodying or satirizing a show that they like. But there's another issue, personally, I have as a writer when it comes to putting a brand in your story, and that is that brand names, at least some of them, do have a shelf life. So if you want your story to feel timeless, if you bring up something like, let's say, Betamax, well then people are going to very quickly date your story to the era when Betamax tapes were common, because they're basically dead now. Now, of course, there are some brands which, for reasons of slander, I will not say that they are monopolies, but they sure as hell feel like monopolies, very anti-competitive behavior. But they are basically so institutional, they feel like they'll be around forever. Things like Microsoft and Sony has been around for a long time. You know, I think also Nintendo, they feel like they're around forever. So for those ones, you might feel like, oh, well, it's fine to mention them. Or hell, I don't even mind getting the whole dated. I don't need my story to be timeless. But here's the other thing. So you might want to add these into your story for spice to add a little flavor, but some spices go sour. Let's say, for instance, that early 2008, you decide that you want your character to drive an electric vehicle to show that they are very environmentally conscious and very liberal. And so you decide to pick the most famous EV vehicle out there, one of the most popular ones. And let's say, hypothetically, you know, contextually, that a few years later, this person comes out as a Nazi, let's say. And let's say that they publicly outed themselves as being incredibly anti-Semitic, very conservative, anti-environmental, and kind of a horrible person. So If that were to happen, you can understand how that would shift the way your story goes, because you don't have control of that brand name if it's not one that you made up. So you can't control how that person is perceived publicly, how that company is perceived publicly. In fact, I think this is the kind of trope they call aged like milk, because yes, some of these brand names could potentially sour over time as more comes out, because after all, corporations are not your friend, billionaires are almost always evil, so you got to be careful when using real-world brand names that they will not. So whilst usually you're using the reality to flavor your story, you don't want reality to sour your story in your readers' minds. Now, the second thing I want to talk about relating to this story is, I've been sort of talking about it a little bit, and I've mentioned it before, that I really hate ghost stories. And I want to explain why, and I want to use this book as an example, as a teaching tool, because the thing is, I don't believe in ghosts, gods, goblins, or gurus, but I'm not here to argue about anyone's religion. I think that's unfair, especially in a public forum like this, especially since I'm the one talking and no one else can talk back. It gives me unearned authority, so I'm not here to dispel anyone of their faith. But when it comes to ghosts, and if you're a spiritualist, I'm sorry, I am here to ruin your day, because the reality is ghosts don't exist. We know this because the mind is a function of the human brain, it's an emergent property thereof, and we've looked into all the things people claim, like ectoplasm, excess energy, the energy of your body going out. But the thing is that there's no medium for that energy to run across. We've measured the energy of the body. The whole 7 pounds thing, it turns out that was just a miscalculation. Turns out that when you don't have precise measuring equipment, people make mistakes. So yeah, there's no such thing as ghosts. It makes no sense. Now, I understand that it may seem weird that I hate that in ghost stories, because that's meant to be scary. But here's an interesting facet when it comes to horror, and this is what I want to teach, is that horror can actually be quite comforting. Like, you might think, oh, we're facing a horrendous monster, what do we do? That's a scary idea. Well, here's the thing. How do you stop a werewolf? Most people already know, you use a silver bullet, right? How do you stop a vampire? Well, you stake them, or use sunlight, right? How do you stop a ghost? Well, you figure out their ghost story, maybe use iron, maybe you solve whatever's keeping them in the real world. All of these things, most monsters, especially stories from like the Middle Ages, they all have their resolution, the way you stop them, because that's how stories work, conflict resolution. And so by introducing monsters in this way and introducing the resolution, we are actually providing more comfort to the readers in a way. And the issue I have when that comes to ghosts is that when the ghost comes out, then we show that the way to help them is to help them move on to the afterlife. We are perpetuating this belief in the afterlife and this whole idea of dualism and souls and stuff. And I personally find it distasteful, because that belief is already so prevalent that by perpetuating it, you're just giving people more encouragement to re-solidify their beliefs. And so, like I said, I recognize this as a personal bias. I find that kind of stuff really distasteful, because it's the kind of thing that encourages religious, magical thinking, like, ooh, there could be ghost spirits everywhere, and this is where you get conspiracy theories from, all kinds of nonsense. And so I personally just think, no, put a stop on that entirely. I will not write stories like that, and I don't promote stories like that if I can avoid it. This one gets away with it because there was a magical key from whence the ghost came, so it's not implying there's some natural thing. No, some supernatural artifact had to intrude on the story to make it possible. But I don't like that comfortable fiction of ghosts, because it does encourage this belief that death isn't real, that when you die you'll survive it somehow, even though when you die you will be dead. So I've always found that distasteful. But thankfully there is some resolution, and this is the other thing I want to teach you. Not only that there's comfortable fiction, but that horror is in a unique position, because it's designed to be slightly discomforting. People enjoy that horror. They enjoy feeling a little spooky scare. And that's why I love things like cosmic horror, because you can end a story saying, here's a monster, here's what happened when they faced it, oh my god, it's still around, we're all screwed. And people can read that and enjoy it. Most people don't like stories without a proper resolution, but often they will have some emotional or intellectual resolution. They now understand what the monster is, even though they can't actually stop it. And so you can fight against this idea that every monster can be stopped by making your story that little bit scarier. I don't know if you can do that with a lot of middle grade fiction, because a lot of people prefer that to be more of a roller coaster for the kids. Scary thing, oh, we've reached the station, calm down, it's all over now. But you can play around with that. You can have your story end in a bad way and still leave your audience satisfied, so long as you resolve some other aspect of the story. You could resolve the conflict of their emotions, resolve the conflict of the mystery, the puzzle that they piece together, relieve the drama of the characters relating to this situation, even though they can't actually stop the end of the world, the monster that's eating their family, whatever this stuff is. So yeah, honestly, that's the main reason I don't like ghost stories, is because I don't think they're honest about how fictional they are. And so, always keep an eye on that, and make sure that you're not perpetuating comfortable horror fictions. So, that was The Haunted Key, the third book in Frightville. In fact, the second last book in this series. The next episode we'll be getting to the fourth and final one in this series, before moving on to the last three books we'll be covering. And I won't go spoiling the plot too much. I'm not that enthusiastic about it, but I will say that the protagonist is very interesting. It's actually a rare sight to see a protagonist like this, but it's also kind of sad that it's not more common. But in order to explain that, we'll have to talk about that then. So, hey, if you thought this was scary, just wait to see what I've got in store for you next time.